All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Beatrice Barrar. It's June 6, 2025, and we're at Hip Chicks Do Wine in Portland. Beatrice, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And the first question to get things started is why wine?
I don't think there's anything else, honestly. I think that's kind of a intense way to come out of the gate, but I think it's true to myself. I can't really imagine myself doing anything else. I don't feel like in the things that I'm drawn to, i.e. like farming and people, there really feels like an alternative for me. And I think that that is maybe because I've only lived in wine country ever, but it feels like something that has, in a much bigger way over the past several years, become the place I end up. But I often feel as though growing up on a very intense organic farm, being born to very naturally minded parents, and then coming up here for school, for physics school, and realizing that wasn't what I wanted to do. It's kind of everything has, in a very retroactive way, I've realized everything in my life has been pointing me towards wine. And in that, I can't find any other context that would bring me to anything else. And maybe that'll change. And I think I have to be open to that changing. But I can't imagine it changing.
It is strong out of the gate. I like that. So let's talk about life before wine a little bit then, or at least life before the current wine. Tell us about where you were born and raised and about your upbringing.
I grew up in Northern California. I was born in a very small town of Forestville at a very close friend of my parents' house. It was a planned home birth because my parents really didn't want to be at all involved in the medical system. They had grown up in the suburban Bay Area, and basically since they were high school students had been trying to figure out how to do the thing that I think so many people on this coast do, which is to get away from it all and move out into the middle of nowhere and build their own house and grow their own food and live that life, live that very kind of simple, almost monastic life, but with each other. And when they were in their 30s, finally found a little plot of land in Mendocino County in California, several hours north of San Francisco, that was totally undeveloped, but was perfectly south-facing and at just kind of a pristine slope, and has pretty horrible soil for honestly anything other than grapes. And it boggles my mind that over the course of the next decade, they built 2 houses on that land and put in olive trees and a vegetable garden and never a single grapevine. Because it's beautiful soil and it's well drained and it's kind of clayey and sandy, and the exposure is literally perfectly south. It's my dad would go to these pieces of property all over Northern California and climb up in trees and with a compass and try and figure out exact exposures, and because they really were trying to have it be self-sufficient. And then, a decade and a half into living there, they had me very late in life when they were 44 and 45. And, the garden was in full swing. They were supporting themselves off of it. The olive trees were planted when I was born. So they're exactly as old as I am, which is special. And I lived there with them, aside from a few stints to a few other different places in Northern California, Mendocino, Sebastopol, until I was about 11, when my mother passed away from breast cancer, kind of expectedly, given her genetic background. And then my father passed away from brain cancer a year and a half after that. and their ashes are scattered under those olive trees. And then I moved. I moved down with some family friends to San Francisco, and I lived with them through high school and had a very hard time of it, honestly. Had a very hard time being kind of pulled out of this very pastoral, very kind of clandestine in some ways, admittedly, but nonetheless very beautiful piece of farmland in the middle of redwood trees into the middle of San Francisco, which was, I think, broadening for me. And spent 4 years there, and then came up here to college. And came up here because I was really interested in science, and that was feeling like a thing that I wanted to do at that moment, and was really putting myself into, and wanted to come up here to go to Reed, as so many people do from San Francisco, it seems, because their physics program is really good. And was there for 4 years, and then the pandemic happened. And in those 4 years, I was rekindling, I think, a lot of the things that my parents left me with. My mother was an herbalist, and my father was, an intense gardener, really deeply talented at agriculture, and at a very human scale of agriculture. His hands were always just like absolutely mangled because he was doing everything with hand tools and often just hands. And it showed, like, the soil there was transformed from clay and sandstone into like maybe the most productive plot of earth in a 10-mile radius, honestly. Kind of magical. I go down there every once in a while, and there's still this, you can see the outline in just everywhere else the grass is this high, and there the grass is this high, and it's not just grass, it's everything. Anyway, kind of at school, unbeknownst to myself, was rekindling a lot of the things that they left me with. Was doing a lot of like fermentation, not necessarily alcoholic, but at points alcoholic. Played around with mead and fermenting like berries and plums just from trees that would grow in the neighborhood. And was curing meat and, foraging wild herbs and making tincture and things. At the same time as receiving a very technical physics education. And then the pandemic happened, and I kind of lost my mind a little bit, as so many of us did, and dropped out of school in a very protracted kind of way, as many people did at that time. And was spending more and more time fermenting, and then was actually doing alcoholic fermentation a lot, was making a lot of mead and was making a lot of various fruit wine, and it really felt kind of like the only thing that was keeping me afloat, until it wasn't, but was for a while. And my life fell apart in a lot of really beautifully expansive ways. Lost a lot of friends and lost a lot of sense of self, and kind of broke myself down into my component pieces, and then over the next couple of years sort of rebuilt them. And at that time, kind of discovered the last thing that my parents had left me with, which was that both of them grew up incredibly religious. My mother's parents were, well, her father was a Greek immigrant, and big Greek family, big Greek Orthodox family, big deeply religious Greek Orthodox family. And my father's parents, his mother was Sicilian, although she was born in the US, and her parents had emigrated from Sicily, from right outside of Palermo. Big Italian family, big Italian Catholic family, big deeply religious Italian Catholic family. And she was, my father's mother was like very much carrying on that tradition of like Southern Italian witchcraft, and the kind that is very ingrained in the Catholic Church down there. I still have her like crystal ball, like literal crystal ball, which is funny. Still feel like she's with me a lot. Anyway, so 2 big religious families, and my parents, I think, in their moving away from it all, moved away from that. And yet in that, my mother would like build little shrines all over our property. And my father had a bookshelf probably this high filled with religious texts from like the early church, and would basically kidnap any Jehovah's Witnesses that came to the door and just have an hour, 2-hour long conversation with them about Jesus. And so even though I wasn't raised explicitly religiously, it was ever present in a way that I only started realizing was a part of my upbringing once everything kind of crumbled a little bit. And I don't think had like a found God moment, but was really looking for structure in my life and was really looking for a connection to family, because I'm kind of all alone up here familially, although I think there's connections that exist outside of that, and I think I've shown that in a big way. But nonetheless, wanted that and wanted the connection to the people that came before me, and have gone to church pretty regularly for most of my life, twice a year. And so started going back every week, and was basically spending most of my time reading poetry, fermenting fruit during the summer, and going to church. And that was also very beautiful and monastic. And in that, found wine and found God, and kind of at the same time, and kind of in each other. There's something so beautiful about the way you pick fruit and kind of kill it and crush it and do kind of unimaginable violence to it. And then out of that, in 3 days, there rises life that kind of grows into this cacophony of smells and textures and alcohol. I'm sure almost everyone who's been on this has probably talked at some point about that little magical thing that happens when fermentation starts, because it really truly is. And for me, at that point in my life, I found a deep parallel between that and the thing that religion gives us, which is hope, which is that there's hope in a thing being destroyed. And started getting more involved in my church community, and at the same time, maybe a year after, once I was really in it, met, actually through kind of unfortunate circumstances, bad things happening to her, Vivienne Kennedy, who I owe most everything to, honestly. But met her under kind of duress, and we chatted a bit over the internet. And she sort of said, I know I'm just some lady, but if you ever want to like get a drink or something, it would be sweet. And I was like, well, actually, you're not just some lady. You've been kind of an idol of mine for the past several years. I would love that on so many levels. And we did, and we chatted for 3 hours about wine and about what it meant to each of us. And kind of at the end of that, she was like, do you want to come down and like bottle with me? And I was overjoyed, because at that point I had had no actual professional winemaking experience, even though I had been kind of, for lack of a better word, fucking around with it for many, many years. If not my whole life. Some of my earliest memories are of like hiding little jars of crushed up apples from the like abandoned apple orchard near our house in like various little nooks and crannies of my bedroom, and my parents coming in and being like supremely pissed that their daughter was like having rotting fruit, because it was rotting fruit, but Anyway.
It's also moonshine at the same time.
It's also moonshine at the same time, exactly. Doing it outside of authoritarian control is sort of important now, isn't it? Anyway, went down and bottled wine and worked with her for, that was in late 2022, maybe? I'm always bad with time. Anyway, worked with her for the early winter, or the late winter, and then spring, and then into summer, and just doing cellar stuff, and kind of not really getting it, because I think as wonderful as like aging wine barrels are, there's something that's a little lost on you when you haven't seen them be born. Because they are just wine. Like the magic's already happened, and it's beautiful, and it's gorgeous, and it's delicious, and yet like there's something remarkable about seeing that little magical thing happen. And so harvest came around, and she was like, I'm gonna need a lot of help for this harvest, because she was upping production, and I was, again, overjoyed. It was all that I wanted, and at that point I was really realizing that it was a thing that I could do, because I was also working in restaurants and still am, and was working with wine and still am in that capacity, but it's different, but was still drawn to it, and was looking for ways to foster it more in my life. And that harvest was the first one, and was magical, and was truly magical to be in that under the watch of someone who is, one, so talented. I think she's a very talented winemaker. I think she makes really good wine. I think she does it in a very respectable way. But she's also an amazing mentor. One of like the most truly caring people that I've ever had the privilege of meeting. And it has felt like such a great gift. And specifically through that harvest, the degree to which she saw me wanting more and kind of just let me loose on the grapes a little bit, which felt nice. And then after that, in the way that I think a lot of people do, kind of immediately had the, oh yeah, this is the thing. Like it had been kind of building to the thing, and it was like this feels nice now, working in restaurants with wine and making wine for myself, and then making wine for a job for someone else. And then harvest happens, and you realize that you just kind of want to give everything you have to give to it. There's something really beautiful, I think, about the way harvest feels at first smaller than you, like this little thing that you're kind of nurturing along, either at bud break, when everything is so vulnerable, and then as fruit starts to begin to form, really just like being so hopeful about what is to come. And then once things actually start getting close to pick, it kind of hits you that there's a lot of it, and it's bigger than you, and then you bring it in and it's so much, and then fermentation starts, and like there's something I really treasure about going up to, because we ferment in big open top fermenters, going up to one of these for punch downs or to check in on something, and the whole thing is, the top couple feet of it is full of carbon dioxide. It's just sort of a sea, and you can't see it. But you kind of lean in to grab a sample of something, or you get a little too overzealous with the punch down tool, or if you're punching down with your feet or hands, you lean in a little too far, and you get your entire lungs full of carbon dioxide. And you have this moment of, oh, this thing that I was so worried about being so vulnerable and so like susceptible to everything that could possibly do to harm it is now actually putting me in danger. And that transformation is something that I really think is kind of at the heart of winemaking for me. Nurturing something until it's big enough to kill you.
In so many ways, too.
In so many ways, yeah, because alcohol does that too. That's the other magical thing about it. It's all kind of poison at a certain point, as it should be. Yeah, and she really showed me what wine can be and how a person who looks like me, frankly, can be in that. And I think at that same time, I was also, after that harvest, the summer after that harvest, and then the winter after that harvest, or the fall after that harvest, and then the winter after that harvest, I came into contact with another woman who has been incredibly influential for me, Valley Lee, who is a winemaker down in California, who also grew up under kind of hippie-adjacent circumstances in Northern California, and then moved down to San Francisco, and is also Catholic. Met her and found that same kinship with her. And she makes wine in a much more weird and esoteric and kind of out there way than I think Vivienne makes wine. And I mean, you know, the wine that she was making was in a little, like, basically insulated tin shed up in the Sierra foothills from grapes that were kind of dying, and, you know, completely unsulfured, untopped barrels. Really deeply beautiful, deeply soulful wine. It's not really anywhere, but if any of your listeners ever get a chance to try her wines, they're kind of remarkable. Came into contact with her at a time in my life where I was realizing that wine was the thing that I needed to give myself into, at a time that she was realizing that she needed to get out of it, but also at a time where I had been very much in religion, and she was realizing that religion was a thing that she needed to give herself into, and we kind of met on opposite sides, and then in the middle, and then past. She's been kind of a constant buzz in my ear to stop sulfuring, and to an even greater degree stop doing much of anything to the wines, and being in between two people who I think make perfect wine, Vivienne and Valley, who make it in notably very different ways in this little microcosm, but in the grand scheme of things, very similarly. Native yeasts and not really like manipulating any chemistry and that sort of thing, and small scale, has been really rewarding for me, because both of them have so much compassion that their way might not be the right way, but that it's the right way for them, and have both given me a lot of compassion that as I'm sort of embarking on making my own wine, they're there to help, but they're never gonna like tell me how I should do it. Yeah, Valley and I think, have been really influential in each other's lives in the past year. She's, I'd say, a solid half of the reason that I'm making wine now, the other half being Vivienne. She's entirely the reason that I'm making wine without sulfur. She's also the reason that I'm having very serious thoughts about moving back down to that little property with the olive trees and my parents and growing grapes there, possibly with her. I'm also her godmother. I went down there this past Easter because she also grew up somewhat religious, but not in an explicit way, and also really found it in wine, kind of being in a much more monastic way than I have ever been, in the Sierra foothills, all alone, farming, again, with little more than hand tools, and making wine for years, in a way that I think was kind of hard on her. And the wines are amazing, but I think she put maybe too much of herself into them, as I think all of us are kind of want to do sometimes, and maybe that's the beautiful thing. Sometimes the thing that you're nurturing ends up getting so big that it kills you a little bit. went down there this past Easter and spent Holy Week with her and got her baptized in a little Catholic church in the Castro, which has a very long history of being kind of a safe haven for queer people. And that felt very special. Went up to Northern California and drove around and looked at grapevines. And now I'm here. I guess that's what I mean by all of those things kind of have led me to no other place than wine. Because I can't take all of that and have any other end. Like there's no other conclusion that makes sense. And maybe part of me hopes that someone else will be like, oh no, you could totally do something else. Totally.
Don't box you into wine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm boxing myself in, objectively. But I don't think that'll happen. I think I'm stuck in the most beautiful, beautiful way.
Let's talk about your first, I guess, official harvest. You mentioned, obviously, you had been fermenting things for a long time.
Yeah, but that doesn't count.
But no formal training and no harvest time. So tell me about what was so exciting about it to you? What was the draw? What was the work like? What was that year? What was that time like?
I think emotionally, the first thing I experienced, and I've heard this from a lot of other people in first harvests, is kind of wanting to be in it 24/7. It really does feel just like this big, great thing that is occurring in front of you, and it feels like even missing a second of it is like denying yourself something. Just like there always being grapes at various stages of fermentation, there always being something to do, there always being more time that you could spend like tending to something, like just kind of silently smelling a ferment. It feels like I could spend 8 hours on each one, honestly, and still like still not understand everything about them. I feel like I could spend a week on just a snapshot of a ferment and still not understand everything about it, where it's going, where it's come from, what's actually happening. And that feels beautiful. And so in that it was sort of a little orgiastic in just the first harvest of it all. Flashing bright colors everywhere and ecstatic visions. And intoxicating in that. There's so much sensory input and so much physical output to do. It just kind of sucks you in and then at the end kind of spits you out battered and broken. And I think I kind of got addicted, like in a big way, in like a first one's free kind of way. Got immediately hooked on it. And was working somewhat full-time at the restaurant too, so kind of wasn't sleeping, and so was in a beautifully altered state most of the time as well. And that also felt very nice in the way that harvest kind of feels like it batters and breaks you a little bit. Bad with timing. There are 1 or 2 harvests since then. I'm very new to all of this. Have felt a little more calm and collected, and some of that is not knowing what I'm doing still, but like having an idea of maybe what I've done, and not just coming at it completely sight unseen. And some of that is just that I can ride that wave a little better now. But that first harvest was a blur in all the best ways. Was, on the scale that we make wine, was a lot of shoveling grapes and a lot of spending hours on top of fermenters just mixing them, and kind of not knowing what was going on in, again, a very fun way, but was delightful. And again, I'm hooked. And through all that, admittedly, was also having a lot of conversations with a lot of the other people in my life. Michael, who you just interviewed, Kirk Sutherland, who for a long time was my mentor in restaurant, in sort of Salming, who also makes wine up here. The Erda wines he makes are also really deeply moving, and are out there. And lots of other people that I could name in excruciating detail, and probably will, but nonetheless was sort of having these conversations of like, oh my God, this is what you guys have been talking about this whole time? This is why you guys are so into this? Oh, yeah, completely. There's nothing else that feels quite as immediate or quite as beautiful. It feels sort of like the heart of life to me. It is being just kind of like, wine isn't a thing humans do. Like it's presented to us from wherever you want to believe that is. But like grapevines grow even without human intervention, not super well, but they grow, and they put fruit on without human intervention, and not super well, but they do. And if enough of that fruit is in the same place, it just ferments and it turns into wine. And it does it on its own, and it kind of needs people to actually do it in volume. But at that, I don't think the people are actually making the wine. They're just kind of a vessel for it, just a conduit to maybe better usher that thing until it can take its own life where it will. But at that little kind of ushering, that being that vessel for that thing, feels kind of like the most human thing to me sometimes. The fact that our eyes have evolved to recognize ripe fruit, and that our noses have evolved to perfectly smell when fermentation starts. There's this thing that Viv and I talk about a lot, and a lot about loving, which is right before, because we're not inoculating, and so right before fermentation starts, there's this little smell. There's this little smell that you get, and it's not fermentation. I'm actually not really even sure what it is, frankly, but there's this dusty, earthy, muddy thing that you smell on grapes after they've been crushed or juiced, usually 12 hours before you see bubbles or smell CO2 or smell that kind of punch of aromatics that comes from fermentation. And the fact that, like, without any training of it, like, there's definitely some things where you have to train your senses to recognize them, but with this I never found that. Like, without any conscious effort, you smell a thing and you go, oh, fermentation's going to start. And you just know. You know when fruit is ripe. I think that's something that's like we've evolved to do. It's deeply ingrained in us. The fact that you can kind of smell and taste what a wine needs is crazy, is remarkable. And that needs training. And that I need training in. But the fact that I can even have a hint of it is magical and feels like magic to me, and feels like a gift that I kind of like have done nothing to deserve, and yet just by the circumstances of my birth are there. And in that, in how tied in we are to fruit and to fermentation as just like physical beings, wine feels sort of like a certain center of the humanity that I experience, at least alcohol more generally. The fact that ethanol feels good, also remarkable. How'd that happen? How'd we get so lucky? How'd we get so lucky?
You talked about your experiences since in Harvest and sort of recapturing the magic, but maybe not being quite so chaotic. Tell me about, I guess, on a more practical side, what you have learned and as you are now ushering wines in, how do you feel? How is your confidence? How is your approach changed?
I think early on, I think the grand course of it, from honestly early childhood fermenting things and having them rot to actually making wine now, or at least trying, there's been a very grand return from starting out just letting the thing happen and kind of like giving yourself over to the faith that it will happen correctly, or rather that the way it will end up is the correct way. There is no correct way. And coming at that very early on from a very naive perspective, and slowly over the course of fermenting things on my own, moving away from that and being like, oh, if you do this, this bad thing won't happen. Oh, if you do this, this bad thing won't happen. Oh, if you do this, this bad thing won't happen. And those are important skills. And I'm happy that I have them, and they are things that I foster in myself. But also, more recently, it's been a return to that kind of naivete that I know very little, both in sort of a very practical sense, but also in a much more grand sense. I think none of us know very much about how wine happens. And we can kind of push it in different directions, but there's always mystery there. There's always something out of our control. And I think it's a really beautiful thing when people make wines that are very expertly crafted. And I think those are very beautiful wines that are, you know, made in a very technical way. I like drinking those wines sometimes. But I think for myself, the joy of winemaking is not so much in crafting a thing that I set out to craft, having an end goal, but is more how the wine itself in kind of bucking me off and saying, no, you're not actually going to let me, you're not actually going to force me to do this. I'm not actually going to end up how you want me to. And then showing me something even more beautiful, the way that changes me. And the way that I've learned to allow that to change me. I think it was it Dali? Was it Picasso? I'm all over the place. One of those painters, was it Manet? I'm not sure. Said at one point, and I guess who said it has stuck with me less than what was said, that he'd had to learn how to paint like a child again. And that was the thing that was taking effort from him, is forcing himself back into that position where the art just flowed. And he wasn't trying to think of what it would be, but just what it was in the moment. And that's not something I've learned how to do yet, but that right now feels like the thing that I'm trying to learn how to do.
So before we talk about your own wine, let's talk about the other side of your career. As you mentioned, restaurants and somm work. Tell me how that came to be something you did, and sort of your path through on that side.
Yeah, worked in restaurants right out of college, just because it's the thing to do in Portland, Oregon, when you're dropping out of school. And worked in a few places, and always was around wine wherever I was in various capacities, be that a red and a white that are in a can, or be that a much larger wine list. And in all of those places, felt a really deep joy in that, in being that person that gets to like serve someone alcohol. Just feels nice. As much as it is like a transactional relationship in that case, I still feel very lucky that I get to be on one side of that transaction, because wine at its heart is something that like brings us closer together. And then, so worked around wine a lot, and then started working at Ava Jeans, where I do work now, and got involved in their wine program, and then got involved in their wine program in a more serious way, and kind of realized that was something that I wanted to do there, and started going through CMS, and I'm very much enjoying selling wine in that capacity, and very much enjoying the like stories I get to tell about other people's wines, and that feels very immediate to me. Isn't necessarily the thing that is like the closest I feel to wine. Hard not to when you're making it, but does feel like a thing that I'm deeply thankful for, that I get to, one, again, be a conduit for people enjoying a nice dinner and a bottle of wine. That feels something that's very precious to me, that people would entrust their evening into my hands in that way, in that small way. But also very much enjoying maybe the like global camaraderie that I feel of showing people other people's wines from across the world, in most cases Italy, who are making wine in a similar way that I make wine and that the people close to me make wine. And maybe meeting them, you know, once every 2 years when they come to the States, but like not really having an immediate relationship with them other than through the juice that they're putting into bottles. But nonetheless being able to connect across that distance in that, and then also not just have that connection be for me, but have that connection be a bridge into someone else's life, who maybe doesn't have the same relationship to it that I do, but nonetheless has an immediate reaction to it because they're drinking wine. And I think you can't drink wine without loving it a little bit. And that feels like something that, you know, I don't want to have all of these like grand sweeping statements about making wine and then have nothing to say about selling it, but like it does feel like this very special kind of cozy thing to have all these conversations about why I like what someone else is doing. And that feels nice. That feels really sweet. Also, very facetiously, restaurants pay the bills in a way that wine doesn't, and maybe shouldn't, but that's a different conversation.
So you talk about being kind of the conduit there. I like that term, conduit, of sort of the story and the wine between. Tell me about that. Tell me about, I guess, on both sides of it, both learning and absorbing that story and then translating it for someone else.
Regardless of, I think, a person's opinions about wine or what wine should be, either if you're on the like, wine is just about how it tastes, it doesn't matter where it's from or how it was made, it's just, can you craft a very beautiful sensory experience? Or if you're on the opposite side of, actually it doesn't matter how it tastes, you can drink vinegar and Brettanomyces, and if it was made somewhere that you think is cool, like that's fine. I may be more being more critical of that standpoint because I am much more on that standpoint, but nonetheless, regardless where you are in what you think wine should be, at its heart, it's that a glass of something can contain more than itself. Either if that thing is story or farming or taste or experience or like scent memory, whatever it is, the argument is that that glass of fermented grape juice can contain more than itself, can be something that transcends its physicality. But none of that exists without the very human context of communicating that. If you find a little thing, like in a vacuum, wine means nothing. It gets you drunk, but like, so does Everclear mixed with water. And if that's your only concern, like, that's probably cheaper and sometimes probably tastes better. So at its heart, you need to be able to talk to someone over the glass of wine. It can't just exist on its own. You have to either talk to the bartender who's pouring it for you, or the somm who's opening the bottle, or the person who made it, or you need to be in the vineyard it was grown in, or you need to like smell it out of barrel and see how it changes after that. You need some of the context of it to have that transcendence. And I don't think what I do in my work as a wine steward is the only way of having that. I don't even think it's the best way, but nonetheless, it is a way. And providing that context, I would say, elevates the experience, but that feels very clinical. I think it actually gives the wine the space to do what it needs to do. And in that, I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just creating that little bit of space to be like, this is why I like this. Why do you like this? And then the wine kind of takes it from there. So yeah, a conduit, a vessel.
You mentioned working with the Quartermaster Psalms. I'm curious about, after having your approach to wine on the other side be so kind of holistic, natural, going to that side it's a very different way to approach it. Tell me about that.
I don't believe I have all the answers, and I kind of believe that I have none of the answers. And at that, I don't think that I can say that I kind of want everyone's opinion. And I think there's something really beautiful about the I don't know, the form of the service that they teach. I think there's something very beautiful about the way they teach people to appreciate wine in this very taste-centered, very kind of technical way. I think it's there's deep beauty in that. It's maybe not the thing that I would be immediately drawn to without someone else showing it to me, but I do think there's a certain sort of deep beauty in it. I like Cabernet. I like Cabernet a lot. I make Washington Riesling. I'm doing the classical thing, I'm sure. It's like you can go and look at, well, to extend the painting metaphor, you can go and look at very old school academic painters who are really just trying to render the human form in the most beautiful way. And regardless of if you think that's the path to divine beauty or not, you can still look at it and go, wow, that's a really pretty picture of a wood nymph or whatever. That's really well done. Her hair looks incredibly real. And genuinely not in you gotta hand it to him sort of way, but there's beauty everywhere. There's really beauty everywhere. And honestly, it does a lot for me to be more intentional about the whole CMS thing and the whole whatever, Barolo, Côte d'Or, Napa Valley of it all. Because people have put a lot of genuine care and love into showing how those things are beautiful. And one, who am I to say that they're not? Because they are. But also, two, if humans have given their all to create that beauty, shouldn't we also all experience it?
So tell me about learning wine on the more formal side for you then. Have you found the same interest in learning regions, learning varietals, learning the soil types? I
have a brain that works like that. I really love just kind of filling my head with information. The physics education probably didn't help. I really find a lot of joy in a way that kind of sometimes feels a little divorced from the actual wine itself, in just the rote information of it all. I really love it. I really love having a map in my head of I don't know, what the soil looks like on the left bank of the Gironde estuary. I love that. I love visualizing where the gravel starts. And I think there's a lot of fun to be had in that. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in that. I think there's in the same way that I think a lot of natural wine people do that same thing without realizing it, in the oh yeah, this guy, he learned from this other guy, and then there's like 3 cows that live in the stall next to the winery, and he uses 2 of them to plow the field. It's like, that's the same thing. You're doing the same thing. You shouldn't feel bad about it. That's the whole point. The whole point is like putting care into recognizing the work someone else has done, be that mapping out foot by foot the soil in Burgundy, or be that carrying on the story of someone like pouring their life into subsistence farming to make wine. Like, be that recording a bunch of people kind of just living out their lives in and around wine in this place. Like, it's, if people have put effort into something, it's worthwhile that we, at the very least, appreciate it. At the very least, pause for a few seconds on it. And I also like the rote memorization of it all.
You can't fight too far against the physics background.
No, can't. Never can. Never can.
So tell me about making wine for yourself then.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll start in kind of an annoying way, which is I don't feel like it is for myself. I think that if I were making wine for myself, I would make 10 gallons of it a year, and I would never give it to anyone except the people I knew, and that would be that. For me, the reason that I started was in no small part wanting to, well, okay, so the wine that I made this past year is the first one that I've made that I intend to like sell. And it's from this little plot next to these people's houses who are grape farmers and are also winemakers, up near Benton City, Crow Vineyards. And it's this little plot that historically every year has been botrytized. It sort of sits in a little divot, and it's kind of a little shaded, which up there isn't the worst thing. And it's very dry up there, but the little kind of like late summer fog usually botrytizes a lot of it. And the harvest before this past one, there was a lot of botrytis on the clusters, and I sort of was talking to Viv about, oh, wouldn't it be cool to like vinify these separately? And maybe see if, without all of the very like German methods, if we could get it to stop fermentation halfway through and end up sweet. Wouldn't that be cool? Again, the wine kind of shows you how it wants to be made. And I said it in a very offhand way, and her, in her kind of steadfast commitment to letting me do whatever I want in ways that maybe she shouldn't, was like, yeah, if you're feeling like you want to take that on, like, let's do it. And so the plan going into harvest was, if those rows get botrytized, vinifying them separately, maybe doing a little bit of berry selection, and seeing what happens. And then they didn't get botrytized. And I was having a lot of conversations with a lot of other people, Alex Neely, notably. Great dude, really great dude. Really great dude. Wish he was mayor. You saw you ran, right?
You got so close.
So close. So close. I voted for him. Anyway, having lots of conversations about how I should actually do that. And sort of being stuck between those conversations and Viv being incredibly encouraging of, yeah, if you have a passion to do this, let's do it. And stuck between that and Valley in my ear being like, hey, you really shouldn't solve for that. And having the really joyful pressure of community on you, of people coming from a place of love, kind of trying to get you to do what they want you to do on a lot of different levels, and yet it coming from a place of love, and so it feeling good, but it's still feeling like pressure. Once I realized that the grapes probably weren't going to get botrytized, it was relatively late in the season, and I was sort of, at that point, flirting with the idea of, in 2025, making wine for myself. And kind of had this moment of realization, actually down when I was visiting Valley in the middle of harvest at that time, right before, right immediately before, that I just kind of needed to. That like holding out until the perfect time was trying to put myself in a position where I knew better, and that I kind of just had to give myself over to it, even though that was scary, and it always is. And so it was like, yeah, I'll take the grapes regardless, and I'll have them be, I will buy them myself with myself and not with the winery. Although legally speaking, it is the winery that bought them. I'm eternally grateful for allowing me to work under her license. And so did. And really, like, it was the last lot that we brought in and drove up there through the gorge in a little rented pickup and got almost a ton of grapes and had a very lovely kind of end of harvest. How much more you guys got with the growers? And came back here and shoveled them into a crusher and pressed them and just kind of sat with that. And was very happy that I did. And then was very scared because fermentation didn't start immediately because it was the end of harvest. And even though there were things going in the winery that did end up kickstarting fermentation, there was a 3-day period of nothing happening. And for your first vintage, having fermentation kind of not start is maybe one of the worst feelings that I've ever experienced. And then also just kind of an opportunity to give myself over to it more. I slept down here after I got off work, I think on day, it was I think day 3. Came down here 1 a.m. after getting off at the restaurant. I was like praying that I would come down and things would be bubbly. And they weren't. But they had a little bit of that smell. That little pre-fermentation kind of dusty mud quality. And I laid out my jacket and I put my backpack down and I kind of took a nap next to the tank. And when I woke up very early in the morning, still late at night arguably, I looked up and there were little tiny bubbles.
You get to witness the birth, basically.
Oh yeah, in a big way. All of kind of like the violence and the heartbreak, and then like the little reminder that hope is always alive. that no matter how bad things get, there's always some little spark of life that will come out when you really least expect it. Which is, I don't know, I think making wine in America at this time in American history feels incredibly important. I think a lot about the wines that were made all across Europe in the mid 30s to the mid 40s, and what it meant to make wine then. A lot. Think a lot about what it meant to make wine in places that were historically war-torn, the Valtellina in northern Italy, you know, that being this great causeway for military force to be funneled through, and yet on the sides of that valley there being some of the most beautiful Nebbiolo grown in treacherous conditions, politically and just physically. I think a lot about the way that wine is a promise to be hopeful. You can't drink new wine. I mean, you can, but it kind of makes you sick. Mm-hmm. You don't want to drink too much of it. It's powerful. You have to let it wait. It never is ready immediately. Like, that's the whole conceit of the whole thing. It takes time. And to make that conscious decision during harvest, when you're presented with all of this really beautiful, sweet, delicious fruit, to say, no, actually, I'm going to have a reason to drink wine in 2 years, 3 years, a decade. Takes a very conscious, takes maybe sometimes a subconscious hope, but it takes hope. It takes at some level, faith that there will be a reason to drink wine in a couple years, that I think is important. And I think more and more, as things progress here politically, I'm more drawn to that hope, and that hope feels like the very reason that I'm making wine is that if I weren't making wine, it would be an acceptance of defeat. It would be saying, well, yeah, maybe I won't really want to drink wine in 2 years. Maybe things will be that bad. And so I keep making wine.
Similar to farming in terms of you have to have a long-term outlook and a long-term amount of hope as you approach the grapevines.
Yeah, because they still make fruit. They still make fruit if you know, if there's wildfires, they still make fruit. If there's drought, they still make fruit. If they kind of make fruit until they're dying little breath. Fermentation will still happen regardless of what's happening. Like, no matter what atrocities are being committed around it, like, wine will create itself. And I think if I can't have that hope, I have nothing.
Tell me how the wine is coming along and what you're planning to do this year.
The wine is coming along, again, in the sometimes giving yourself over to it is what you need to do, much better than I expected. It's clean and very clear, and really elegant. For a fermentation that took so long to start, there's no hint of anything. It's like lemon zest and rainwater. And I'm really happy with it. And it has felt much more than any of the other wines that I've made or helped make, has felt like a little gift that, that little bit of faith that I had that was like pulling teeth, both in a very technical level, but also in the like, is it actually worth it to make wine? Like, is alcohol production what I want to spend my life doing when there's so many bad things happening? It kind of felt like a little divine gift of, there you go. There's your little bone. Now you have to do the hard part, but like, here's your little rainbow after the flood. And has admittedly emboldened me to make weirder stuff, unfortunately. This year, along with perhaps some of this, again, I'm working on this project of trying to make fruit wine from basically volunteer trees or abandoned trees around Portland, around people's houses, on the street, because there's just so much of it here. Kind of everyone that's the beautiful thing about the city, has like a weird apple tree in their backyard that like every 3 years puts out a bumper crop because no one ever prunes them. And at least judging, and it's been this really wonderful way of finding community in it. Having to source fruit from like dozens of different places is a really lovely exercise in actually having to like knock on people's doors and like ask acquaintances for favors. And we're not set up here to make cider, and a lot of it's going to be apples, and so it's forcing me to like form those connections and be like, asking for something. And that also feels important, in the more that we're like divided and not having enough at this time in history, and worried about each other and worried about each other not hating each other or whatever. It feels like a really wonderful exercise to be like, no, I'm actually always indebted to the people around me. That's like the human conceit. We all owe each other everything all the time. And I really feel lucky that I'm having this very immediate experience of that through wine. I don't know, come back to me in 3 months and see how I'm doing, having to like organize pick dates for 24 different trees on 20 people's different properties to make 1 ton of fruit, like, get back to me. But I think it's forcing myself into a position that is going to feel bad in the moment and good all other times, which feels like what harvest is always. And really excited about it. Really excited about making wine in a way that to me feels very old. Just the earth gives us its fruit, and what we do with it is both a gift and also a responsibility. Just being a vessel for the fruit of the earth is something that I really deeply treasure, and don't think I do particularly well, but that feels part and parcel to it. Nice feeling of knowing that you can do something kind of poorly. which also feels like the heart of my religion too.
So you mentioned having 2 very strong winemaking mentors who do things in a similar but different fashion. So tell me about finding your sort of winemaking voice, and when the question comes about sulfur, how do you answer it?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, the sulfur thing I feel like is funny that in this microcosm has been sort of the main differentiator, and often is sort of put in larger conversations about wine contemporarily, is being put as this like big delineator. I admit I don't really see it as that. I don't think I'm in any position to like say how wine should be made. I think I'm in an okay position to say how it is made, but not how it should be. Not for me to know, not for me to say. I think the thing that matters most to me about making wine, maybe the only thing that matters to me about it, is that it's honest, is that it's genuine, is that it's done from a place of like deep love for the earth, for like the people who will drink your wine, and for beauty, or whatever you want to call it, for something bigger than yourself. And if you're making wine in a way that is genuinely done from a place of love for those things, like, use Mega Purple. Like if you're doing it honest to God, like, please. I'm sure that wine is amazing. If it is done genuinely. I think the argument is that sometimes it's not, or that often it's not. But I know sulfur doesn't preclude you from making good wine. I know acidulating doesn't preclude you from making good wine. I know that whatever doesn't preclude you from making good wine. All the things that make bad or dishonest or greedy wine come from within. The reason I didn't sulfur and don't sulfur, haven't, is just because I haven't like felt a need to. It has felt like a tonic against the anxieties of winemaking for me, and in that would just make all of that go away. And I think doing something just to push bad feelings away is never the right choice. Like, it's fermentation, it's a natural process. You kind of have to give yourself over to it. For me, it has always felt like sulfuring the wines that I've made and am making would be allowing myself too much slack. A lot of the wines I love the most are sulfured. I think finding a style is something that I'm really enjoying right now in this early part of my career. And I'm really treasuring because so much of it is drawn from other people. It's often said, like, there's no original art. You're just commenting on what everyone else is doing, and I think that's true. Percy Shelley has a really great way of putting it that escapes me right now, but in the beginning of Prometheus Unbound, says something about, like, if you're going to accuse me of lifting something from someone else, do it. I have. All art is just a product of what else is existing around it. And in that, I feel that with wine. Like, I've never had an original thought in my life. Never want to. It's something that I deeply treasure to ask everyone that I can how they think I should be doing it. And maybe that's the thing I treasure most, is getting to be in that position of very intentional, like, and practiced humility of, like, please, I don't know. Even and especially when I feel like I do. And maybe that'll fade as I age, but, like, right now I'm really enjoying it. And so finding a style has felt more like finding a style of how logistically I want to make the wines than it has been finding a style of how I want the wines to taste. I think there's a style of sort of like small production, unsulfured kind of esoteric wine that exists right now that is like kind of Bretty and usually pretty herbal and yummy. And even though those are the conditions under which I made this wine, it's not that. It tastes like Washington Riesling. One of the first wines that I truly knew I loved was the Chateau Saint Michel dry Riesling. And that's objectively what I'm making stylistically. And I'm not, but if only. So finding a style has been more finding a style of how I want to make the wines, and that for me is just in community and with other people, and just as nothing more than the person who happens to be the person that everyone else knows. It can't be just me, and it is never just me, and that's the beautiful thing about it. Like winemaking is a communal task, and I think anyone who tries to present it as anything but has ulterior motives.
Let's talk about that community a little bit, and tell me about your. Obviously, you've talked about some of the strongest connections you have in the wine industry. Tell me about the Oregon wine industry as you kind of entered into it. What were your impressions of the people in it, the wines being made, and sort of the direction it was going?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's being a young winemaker in a young wine region is a funny thing, because on one hand, I'm sort of like, we're all kind of unbound from anything. Like, we're growing Pinot up here, but we don't need to be. I think Pinot grows well up here, but like other things do too, Malbec. Stylistically, there's a style that existed in like the 90s and the 2000s, and I think it's a wonderful, delicious style. And there's a different style that exists right now, and I think it's a wonderful and delicious style. And I think the style that will exist probably in 10 years is going to be a wonderful and delicious style, and we simply just have the ability to change that quickly. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think everyone up here is open to that and is excited about it, and at their heart wants the best for each other. And I think in that also I've found it's kind of cliquey. There's a little bit of lines in the sand up here. And I think that is because people are struggling to like figure out what it actually is up here that exists. And when you have to figure out what something is, you have to have strong convictions, and when you have strong convictions, you kind of rub up against other people. And in that, I do notice a little bit of attention up here right now that I think will resolve into something really wonderful as we all kind of like come together in that. But I do think there's sort of this push and pull that's happening, that I see happening, and I see kind of playing out. And again, this is the thing I treasure. As I'm figuring out what my place is in all of it, everyone else is also sort of figuring out what it is. And yet, at the heart of it, I think we all want the best for each other. And I think ultimately that will happen. And I think I see a lot of it happen every day. There's a beautiful thing that I think happens up here, which is that even though there is the Pacific Northwest kind of coldness behind it, especially in the wine industry, once you bust through that, everyone just wants to help. Everyone just wants to help. And that's the thing I love about being in a young wine region, is that everyone wants to help because we're kind of roughing it. And it is kind of the Wild West still. And so even with that tension and that weird little clickiness sometimes, it's really wonderful to see underneath that everyone caring so deeply and showing up so deeply. And I really treasure that I get to have my first winemaking experiences here because of that. To like be met so immediately with something that everyone has something to complain about, and in that seeing the deep goodness of people and the deep goodness that wine brings about.
As you look ahead for that tension, as you mentioned, as you described it, tell me about how it could resolve itself, or how you see the industry unfolding over maybe the next decade.
Oh, I have no idea. I think wine's going to change I think there's a lot of economic factors at play and cultural factors at play that are going to, and very importantly, environmental factors. Like the Industrial Revolution irreparably changed wine. The Second World War irreparably changed wine. The current environmental catastrophe is irreparably changing wine. The Roman Empire changed wine. The Ottoman Empire changed wine. It's always changing. There's this weird thing that we do in wine of being like, oh, it's this ancient beverage, and it is, but it's not. Like, wine's unrecognizable 200 years ago, and 200 years before that, and 200 years before that, and that's the beautiful thing about it. We've carried on that torch of the very human thing of fermentation, even as the style has changed. And in that, how do I see it changing in 10 years? I see it kind of breaking down into pieces and then being reformed in something new. Not to be like, the end of the world is nigh, but like, I really hope and pray that it changes in a way that brings it back to a very human scale. Up until the Second World War, and well, definitely up until the Industrial Revolution, and arguably up until the Second World War, wine was a thing that you made in the same way that you would make pot roast. In that you would make it for yourself and your family, and if someone needed some, you gave it to them. And as much as I really do treasure the fact that I can drink Left Bank Bordeaux in Portland, Oregon, that does not feel for me like what wine is in its totality. And as much as I love drinking wine from far away and really love the idea of a place that is just so perfectly suited for Vitis vinifera and grown so perfectly and has so much tradition and history, that's not why I think wine is special. I think you can get that from a lot of things. Any luxury product. The thing that I think makes wine special is that we can all do it. Is that we can all do it. And we maybe should all be doing it. And maybe I have a hope that that's what the future of the Oregon wine industry will look like, or the future of all wine industries, is that in this big communal thing, it will be less about individual producers and more about just farming grapes and making wine for its own sake. Wine to have wine, not wine because it's the best wine, but just wine to have wine. Wine because we need to get drunk sometimes more than others. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do hope there will be more of it. And I really rejoice at the little bits of it that I see.
You talked earlier about your own future and potentially being not necessarily in Oregon. Tell me about, as you look ahead for yourself, what do you want to do that you haven't done yet, and where do you hope it'll take you?
Back to that little property in Northern California, admittedly. I think I'll also be buried under those olive trees. I really like making wine up here. I really think that like the Washington Desert is one of the most compelling places for growing grapes, and one of the ones that I've found just like some of the most beauty in. I think the wines from there are wonderful, and I think we're getting to a point where people are actually like tasting them, because it's been used so much as like a bulk wine production area that you don't really actually taste what it has to offer, and what it has to offer is magical. It whispers. It's delicate and it's subtle in a way that such a hot place one doesn't expect. There's an elegance to those wines even when they reach 15%. It feels like the wines from there, when they're made in a transparent way, feel like a bird calling in like the desert night. Like it is, there's something really beautiful there, and I love that place. And also, I struggle finding my voice in it. I struggle having a thing to say other than just, wow, look at how beautiful this is, look at how wonderful these grapes are. Because that's not the place that I've like felt as deeply the rhythms of. And I think to truly, yeah, the future for me is in California, and the present is deeply in Oregon and Washington. And it's nice to hold those two things at the same time, because I'm learning so much from all the people up here and from the land up here, and want to continue, and don't think that that point is going to come soon, but do understand that there's a point at which I'm going to get to a point where I do want to say something, because I don't really want to say anything right now. I just want to be like, hey, look how beautiful this is. That feels most immediate. But I know there is a time in my life where I will have something to say. And I think, unfortunately, that thing will maybe have to be said on the piece of property that I was born on. Mm-hmm. Grand returns. But for now, it's feeling really wonderful to like be just so in awe of this all up here. And kind of have, even though I've been here for a decade, have kind of what still feels like an outsider's perspective of, look how wonderful the wine is up here. Mm-hmm. Having that distance to really know that it's true experience of beauty. Mm-hmm. That's not just because I have feelings tied up in the Pacific Northwest, that it's actually that I'm witnessing something beautiful in processing grapes up here.
All right. I think that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you want to cover?
Felt exhaustive.
You've been flogged in the chair now?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. Well.
Beautifully so.
Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story, sharing your perspectives with us, talking about the future a little bit. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.